The FDA this week delivered an ultimatum to retailers and manufacturers of nicotine vape products, also called e-cigarettes. My question is this a public health crisis, a political maneuver, or both? The FDA has given the industry 60 days to prove that they can keep their products away from minors. The FDA said that in 2016, the number of high school and middle school students using nicotine vape products was more than 2 million. It is, according to Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, a national trend of epidemic proportion. But the FDA's stance could threaten a product that for some does more good than harm. Nicotine vaping is also a form of substitution that has helped wean many adults from harmful traditional cigarettes. Although we're witnessing historically declining rates of smoking, the CDC notes that roughly 15% of American adults still smoke cigarettes. But the FDA believes that vaping's threat to younger demographics outweighs its beneficial effect for adults. Here's what the FDA commissioner said. The FDA won't tolerate a whole generation of young people becoming addicted to nicotine as a trade-off for enabling adults to have unfettered access to these same products. So the FDA has demanded that vaping manufacturers, quote, demonstrate that they're truly committed to keeping these new products out of the hands of kids, and they must find a way to reverse this trend. And the FDA has given the industry 60 days to prove that it can keep the products away from minors. But what does that mean exactly? As I read the FDA release, I wondered if the ultimatum that it presented to the vaping industry already constitutes a closed case. And I can't help but wonder if the timing is politically motivated. Consider this, it's a bit out of character for the normally deregulating Trump administration, known for rolling back environmental and health standards, to give an ultimatum to an industry that it must act or face more regulation. And it seems a bit too fitting to the political calendar. Why 60 days? That guarantees that the vaping will be at dinner table and news conversation right through the election. Seen as such, it's a win-win for the administration. Win one, the FDA ultimatum is a defense of America's susceptible youth. How is anyone to take issue with the image put forth of 2 million kids suffering from the whims of an industry and drug that has unknown health hazards? A youth in peril of vaping seems perfect to tap into suburban fears of what has truly been a rampant phenomena and would transcend party affiliations in gaining sympathy. Win two, also from a political point of view, the FDA doesn't even need to follow up on its threat to the vaping industry. The wording is so vague that it's hard to imagine how exactly they'd even do so. Moreover, companies like Juul have already taken a number of initiatives to do the very thing the FDA has asked them to do. And as I pointed out, the deadline is a very convenient 5 days after the midterm election. Joining me now, Alan Brandt, professor at the Harvard Medical School and author of the book, The Cigarette Century, The Rise, Fall, and Deadly Persistence of the Product That Defined America. Is there, Professor, any off-ramp for the industry in light of this edict from the FDA?
Well, I think the industry is going to have to take underage use of e-cigarettes extremely seriously, both in this immediate period of Commissioner Gottlieb's demand, but in the longer term as well, because in some ways I do think this is an issue that transcends, blue and red, Republican and Democrat, because what we're really seeing is the tremendous uptake of nicotine in first-time users. This is not people trying to reduce their use of traditional tobacco-burning cigarettes. What we're really seeing is an enormous market in high school students, middle school students, and a giant industry is being created around that market. And so in one sense, I think what we're seeing is a slow motion train wreck, and that rather than things getting better as they did around tobacco and nicotine through the last 30, 40 years, we could really addict a new generation of kids who ultimately may end up using a range of tobacco products that we don't really understand. So I think that Gottlieb's move this week is tremendously important. And quite frankly, I think these are the kinds of things that can't wait for election cycles. This is a public health disaster that is already moving along.
Well, look, my cynicism stems from the fact that I have the midterms on the brain. And so when somebody says to me 60 days out, the only thing I can think of is November 6th. Professor, Here's the conundrum as I understand it. I get what you're saying. Regardless of whether vaping, e-cigarettes lead to combustible cigarettes, you're saying they're bad enough in and of themselves because of the nicotine delivery. How do we keep them out of the hands of teens, middle schoolers, high schoolers, but protect the ability of those who are using it as a substitution model to get away from a combustible cigarette? Because I think we want that, right? We'd rather you be vaping than smoking a combustible cigarette.
Well, there are a lot of issues in your question. One thing we know is that for many kids, their first nicotine use is now becoming e-cigarettes, and that the market has been very aggressively pitched to them. It's a market that's been growing tremendously. So we have this dilemma that here's a product in some ways rationalized by the notion that it will assist people in reducing the harms of traditional combustible cigarettes. First, it seems absolutely clear that Juul and other companies have really directed their product to very young teenagers, middle school students, high school students. They have flavors like mango, creme brulee, fruit medley. Some of the other companies have gummy bear and bubble gum. And these flavorings and these products are easier to smoke than combustible tobacco, are creating this dilemma. Now, what is the evidence really at this point that these products are really assisting smokers in ending the use of combustible, highly dangerous, nicotine-rich cigarettes? Well, it's unresolved. So on the one hand, we don't have great data to show that this product actually works for the purposes that the companies have been aggressively suggesting. And what we do know is that this has rapidly become a billion-dollar industry. Juul, the leader in the industry, which has 60 to 70% of all sales now, has been valued around $17 billion by Wall Street. That puts it in the territory of Uber and Airbnb. And I think this has been happening below the radar. Appropriately, CNN's been covering the hurricane in the Carolinas intensively, as it should, over these last few days. And it's an emergency. But sometimes things like this are happening, and the market is big, the means of promoting through the internet, advertisements on Instagram. So we're watching the beginning of a public health disaster. And I think it's very appropriate for the FDA to demand, for example, that these companies stop selling flavored products, that they have much more aggressive restrictions on youth sales. I went on the Juul site this morning, and the first thing it says, are you over 21 or not? And I thought,
21, right, I put that on the screen, yeah.
Yes, and no kid is going to say, yes, I'm under 21, so I can't see the Juul site. And these products are becoming widely available.
Professor, come back and discuss this with me at a different time. Thank you so much for being here.
I'd be pleased to. Thanks for having me on.
Here's some of what you're saying on my Smerconish Twitter and Facebook pages. What do we have? Smerconish, unless these manufacturers are selling their products in a clear way to children, the flavors alone aren't a reason to ban them. Adults can like mango and cotton candy flavors too. I don't smoke anything, yet I agree that this could be too severe. Aurora, I'll simply say this, anecdotally. I base this anecdotally as a father of four, three of them boys, one of them still in high school. I'm not defending nicotine vaping, right? We'd all as parents rather that no one, none of our kids are involved with e-cigarettes. But they don't desire to smoke combustible cigarettes. Anecdotally, I tell you, they may think it's cool to vape, but they think that smoking cigarettes is dirty and it holds no appeal. So it's not a gateway argument. Now, to the professor's point, he thinks there are health risks in and of themselves that should cause us to want to regulate the industry. But it's confusing because you need to protect the ability of those using it as a substitution model at the same time. If somebody is smoking cigarettes and wants to get off it and chooses to vape, we'd rather have them vape, I think, as a societal health matter.